My Hero Academia, All Grown Up. Chapter 39. Uraraka was hardly able to contain her excitement as she stuffed her duffel bag to the brim. Her fingers trembled with anticipation as she yanked and begged for the zipper to close all the way. She hurried across her apartment to snatch her purse off the counter and glanced at the time. Only 15 minutes left. She rushed back to the bedroom and threw the purse down beside her duffel before racing to the bathroom to fix her hair for the 4th time. A ponytail that she'd teased just right, and her bangs had a breezy curl to them that made her look effortlessly adorable. Oh, she really nailed it. Although, another coat of lip gloss wouldn't hurt, would it? As she went to work on popping open the lip gloss tube, she spied her favorite sandals peeking out from under her shower towel that she'd thrown onto the floor in her haste. She'd looked everywhere for those earlier and had resigned herself to defeat, but now she had to somehow cram those into the duffel bag as well. There was no way she could leave without them, and she wasn't about to unpack the entire back to remove a different pair of shoes. She'd make it work. She had to. The lip gloss was left forgotten and doomed to dry out as she flew back into the bedroom with the sandals. She dared to unzip the bag just enough to shove them inside before she battled against the zipper once again. Just when the thought of checking her hair again crossed her mind, a knock broke her focus. A silent squeal threatened her lips as she was shocked back to reality, and she bolted to her floor-length mirror. She gave herself a lightning-fast once-over. Denim pants, an effortlessly breezy pink tank top, and his black coat that she still hadn't washed. The whole look came together with her scrubbed-clean sneakers. Another knock canceled out her self-admiration, and she took a series of deep breaths on her way to the door. She gave herself a wordless pep talk before she pulled it open and put on a bright smile. Katsuki. The blonde blinked back at her in shock, clearly unprepared for her enthusiasm and the use of his first name. He hadn't heard her say it for a few days, and he had to consciously wipe the pathetic look of adoration off his face before speaking. Took you long enough? Uraraka couldn't help but feel dismayed at his typical response, and she laughed awkwardly. Yeah. Sorry, I was just, well, packing? You're not packed, he asked bluntly and glanced back down to the street to see the car parked along the curb. No, Uraraka blurted out with a nervous smile. I mean, yes, I am. I was just doing one last thing when you knocked. Sorry. I'll get my stuff, okay? Bakugou could sense her embarrassment, and he couldn't help but smirk at her. Excuses won't get you anywhere, round face. Uraraka puffed up her cheeks as she opened the door wider for him. I thought we were done with the nicknames. Bakugou sniffed in amusement as he stepped inside. Just because you're kacchako now doesn't mean you stopped being round face. Once inside, he immediately took stock of her messy apartment. Clearly, she hadn't had the time to tidy up in the last few days. Uraraka gaped at his back. Oh, is that right? Come on, we don't have all day. Get your stuff and let's go. Bakugou strode across the apartment to peek past her bedroom door to see that her mattress was still on the floor and her new bed frame was still untouched. Her duffel bag was straining against the zipper on the bed, and clothes were strewn across the floor as her obvious rejections for the trip. The fuck? We're only going away for 2 days, oh. Why did you pack so much stuff? Uraraka shouldered her way past him with a frown. Well, I didn't know where you were planning to go, so. She trailed off and shrugged at the duffel bag. I guess I packed for everything. I figured that you'd get the hint when I told you to pack a swimsuit. Bakugou smirked at her and softly shook his head. Whatever. We don't have time to figure it out. Let's go. He grabbed her purse off the bed and tossed it to her before he snatched the duffel bag and turned toward her front door. Uraraka blushed as she watched him leave, his new nickname for her echoing in her head. She liked it a lot, and if she was honest with herself, she hoped she could come up with a cute nickname for him too. She grabbed her keys and her phone before following him out, locking her apartment up behind her. She quietly followed him down the stairs to a sporty, white car parked along the curb. You own a car? Bakugou gave her an odd look as he opened the trunk lid to the coupe. Of course I do. Uraraka blinked in surprise as he tossed her duffel in before he circled back around to open the door for her. I didn't know that about you. Why don't you drive it very often? Bakugou shrugged in slight annoyance as she ducked into the car. Because everyone in this damn city sucks ass at driving. It's faster to take public transport anyway. Uraraka opened her mouth to reply but found that the door was shut. She smiled to herself as she watched him walk around to his door and seat himself behind the wheel. So, where are we going? Bakugou gave her a sideways glance, but didn't respond before he turned into traffic and hit the gas, bringing a surprised and excited squeal to Uraraka's lips. She giggled hard as he slowed down, and she caught a smirk on his lips before he turned a corner and took off again. She knew that he tended to be a bit of a show-off in most things, but this felt different. He was teasing her in a boastful way, relishing in the nervous but excited laughs that escaped her as he tried to quickly maneuver them through town. He squeezed the car through tight gaps and punched it through every open straight. And without fail, he turned a devilish eye on her before pulling a move that left her stomach floating in her gut. When she had the wherewithal to ask, he never divulged where they were going. She could tell early on that he was heading for Tokyo's airport, but beyond that, she wasn't sure. Surely, wherever he was taking her, it would be a perfect weekend. It wasn't until Bakugou dropped both their bags down on the way station that she learned the answer. The airport worker took the tickets from him and gave them a bored look. 2 bags to Okinawa? Uraraka had tried to contain her excitement at the idea of going to the popular getaway destination. She didn't want to admit to him that she had never been, but her floundering squeal gave it away. He teased her about it the entire flight with smart remarks and made-up facts about the island. She was gullible to some, but after a while, she wised up to his game and pressed his white lies until they were turned into something completely ridiculous. Once the wheels of the plane touched down in Okinawa, dusk had settled in. They collected their luggage and headed out of the airport. Bakugou flagged down a cab, shouldering both duffel bags and vehemently refusing to share the load. Uraraka learned quickly that he was especially stubborn when he was playing the part of a gentleman. After a few spats with him, she relented and let him do what he wanted. After all, she couldn't fault him for trying, even if he was being a bit overdramatic about it. And despite how guilty she felt for carrying nothing but her purse, she felt particularly special for his effort, and she was endlessly amused by it. Who knew Katsuki Bakugou could be so adorable when he was trying so hard not to be? The cab was a bit cramped in the back seat, and they both became hyper-aware of it right off the bat. Their shoulders touched, and neither one of them knew how to respond to the closeness, so they simply looked opposite ways to spare each other the awkwardness of it. The fling they'd had a few weeks ago felt like a distant memory now, and both of them tried to rationalize how they'd found themselves crammed into the back seat of a cab in Okinawa on a whim. Moreover, what were they going to do when the cab reached their destination? Once that thought had circled their heads enough in silence, the cab stopped and the driver glanced back at them. Have a great stay in Okinawa. You can pay with a card or cash. Uraraka immediately reached for her purse, feeling a sudden wash of guilt that Bakugou had already funded everything to that point. He reached across to place a hand on her knee. I got it. No. Uraraka's voice was a mix between insistence and pleading. Let me pay for the cab. He paused and eyed her for a moment before he removed his hand and nodded his head once, recognizing the look on her face as inarguable and ever so slightly guilty. He knew that paying for every single thing wasn't going to be an option for him, even if he wished it was. He supposed he could make a few concessions on smaller things. If he was going to be honest with himself, his wallet wouldn't complain about that either. Okinawa was a tourist trap, and his bank account would learn that lesson much sooner than he did. Paying for the cab was an understandable request, so he wouldn't argue. Instead, he started collecting their bags from the trunk. Uraraka met him outside a few minutes later. She offered to take her own luggage, but was unsurprisingly denied. She didn't fight him on it. Instead, she looked up the sidewalk and found a house. Well, she wasn't sure if she could really call it a house. It appeared to be more of a bungalow of sorts. It looked old and weather-worn, but the chipping blue paint gave it undeniable character. What is this place? Bakugou shrugged her heavy duffel bag further up his shoulder before he stepped toward the gate that led into the small, overgrown yard. My family's vacation home. You guys have a vacation home? Uraraka's jaw dropped in pleasant surprise, but truthfully, it wasn't a hard truth to wrap her head around. Bakugou's parents were certainly well off, but a second home in Okinawa seemed like an underscore to their wealth. Yeah, Bakugou lumbered his way up the path until he was standing on the small wraparound patio. I came here every summer for 2 weeks growing up. He pulled out his keys and unlocked the door. Don't fucking tell anyone about this place. He paused and gave her a stern look, especially Kirishima. If that fucker learns that I have access to a place like this, then he'll dash. You don't have to say it. Uraraka laughed and held up a hand. I already know. Bakugou didn't respond before he pushed his way through the door and felt for the light switch. Uraraka followed him inside and immediately noticed that the place smelled a bit stuffy and stagnant. Once the lights were turned on, she understood why. The interior looked very much like the exterior, old and from another era. The furniture was a decade out of date, and the wallpaper appeared to have an even older story. She blinked in surprise and only found one word to describe it. Wow. Blame my mother. Bakugou grunted before he dumped their duffel bags down on the hardwood floor. She keeps promising my dad that she'll fix this place up, but she never fucking follows through. No. Uraraka breathed as a smile graced her lips. I love it. Bakugou watched her as she stepped further into the house. It was a remarkably small place with a lofty layout. It was only a single bedroom with a tiny kitchenette and an equally small living space. Everything was wide open except the bathroom, but Uraraka didn't seem to mind it at all. In fact, it seemed to place her under some sort of spell, like she was walking through a museum. She silently ran her fingers over a wicker cabinet, admiring the framed photographs on the wall above it. She smiled at the ones of him playing on the beach as a child, and she giggled softly at one in particular that showed a scowling blonde boy, no older than 6 or 7, with a floaties around his arms and a circular tube around his waist. She worked her way around the entire space, mindlessly admiring the now-vintage propane stove and chuckling at the floral print living room set his mother had bought when she inherited the house. Uraraka seemed especially taken with the handmade kotatsu table that Bakugou's grandfather had made long before either of them had been born. But when her journey found herself at a set of French doors, propped open like an invitation, she paused and a startled look crossed her face. What is that? Bakugou frowned before he met her in the living room and followed her gaze. Beyond the French doors was the tiny bedroom, and on one side of the bed was a bare mannequin, posed like it was looking directly at them. Fucking hag. He shook his head and stepped toward it. My mother takes these damn things everywhere she goes, so she can design her shitty clothes. Uraraka laughed, but there was an edge of nervousness to it. And she keeps it next to the bed? Fuck if I know. Bakugou grabbed the mannequin and noticed that the fleshy paint had begun to chip, giving it an especially horrifying look. She has some serious fucking issues. I don't know how my dad deals with her. Uraraka watched as he frowned in mortified shock at the mannequin before he shoved it into the closet and yanked the door shut. He dusted his hands off before looking at her. Don't open that door. Forget that fucking thing is even here. We can put our clothes in the dresser. Uraraka's hearty laugh threw him off guard before she nodded and promised to never open the door. She wandered back to their luggage by the door and scooped it up. So you spent every summer here, huh? Yeah. Bakugou met her halfway across the room and took his own bag, the worst part of every summer. Oh, come on. Uraraka handed the bag off and followed him to the bedroom. You're so lucky. This place is so amazing. Bakugou sniffed at her, but he knew what she was referring to. He knew he was lucky to have such a fortunate family that could afford a vacation home, but the trips to Okinawa grew less fun as he grew into adolescence. The 2 weeks spent there every summer made him feel cramped and grouchier than usual. In high school, he'd excused himself from the trips altogether for the sake of his schooling, but his parents knew as well as him that it was nothing more than just an excuse to escape the forced family time. Uraraka's reaction to the place now only cemented the guilt in him about skipping out on them. It sort of felt like lost time now. They unpacked their clothes in silence, outside of the single comment Bakugou made about Uraraka's overpacking. Once done, they found themselves looking at each other cluelessly, unsure of what to do. Bakugou cleared his throat and made for the living space, plopping himself down on the old cloth sofa. Are you hungry? Sure. Uraraka gave him a warm smile. Is there anywhere open nearby? Bakugou scratched his chin and tried to recall what was around, but it had been years since he last visited. We could walk into town. It's only a few minutes away. Uraraka crossed the room and sat down beside him. All right. She glanced around the room once more. I really like this place. It's so cute. Teach. Bakugou shook his head dismissively. Don't tell my mother that. She'll just use it as an excuse to ignore this place for another year. Why don't they sell it? Uraraka found herself inquiring aloud. I mean, if you guys don't use it, then why keep it? Bakugou raised his eyebrows at the question and considered it. Fuck if I know. Maybe it's for real estate reasons or some shit. It doesn't really matter anyway. My mother is the only one that's been here in the last few years. Uraraka hummed and leaned back on the floral sofa. You never mentioned that your family came to Okinawa every summer. Why would I? Bakugou scoffed at her and motioned to the decor. I mean, look at this fucking place. It's worse than I thought it would be. I should have just gotten us a hotel or dash. No. Uraraka cut in with a sharp tone. This. She turned her face toward him. Is perfect. Thank you for bringing me here. Her hand seemed to hesitate before she carefully rested it on his knee beside hers. I feel so lucky that you shared this with me. Bakugou could hardly find coherent thoughts when he met her honest expression. Her bright brown eyes held a certain sincerity that yanked on the feelings he'd only just begun to fully recognize. He felt his jaw drop ever so slightly, but Uraraka seemed to pick up on his absence of words and decidedly filled the silence. Bakugou dash, she smiled awkwardly and started again. Katsuki. She had no idea how using his name made his chest constrict. About Edshot's rule dash. Fuck that rule. Bakugou immediately cut in before she could continue. Uraraka blinked back, shocked by his outburst. A long moment of silence passed as they each tried to silently reconcile with the other through vague looks, but Bakugou took a deep breath and sat up straight. Fuck Edshot's dumbass rule. Let's do this fucking thing. Uraraka shook her head, second-guessing if she had heard him right. What? I thought that you wanted to wait until the end of the Viper case. Fuck that guy too. Bakugou shrugged like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I'm sick of this shit. Oh. Even if we have to keep it a secret, I'm not going to waste another second of my time waiting around for us to miss our chance. Uraraka scrunched her eyebrows. I'm confused. I thought that we agreed to put whatever. She wagged her finger between them. This is on hold until we could be sure that our jobs wouldn't be affected. Bakugou shifted in his place and gave her a half shrug. Yeah, and... Well, Uraraka paused to search for the words she wanted to say. Aren't you worried that Edshot will find out? Bakugou had thought long and hard about that ever since he had asked her to start using his first name. Truthfully, he hadn't come to a solid answer on that point yet, but the one thing he knew for sure was that he wanted to be with Uraraka, even if it put his career in a tough spot. The inner struggle he faced when it came to her proved to be a much bigger stressor than whether or not he worked on the Viper case. Sure, he wanted to be in the top 10, but Uraraka somehow trumped that goal. It was both infuriating and enlightening at the same time, but he'd come to accept that he had to choose, and he'd made up his mind.
It was too late to turn back now.
His silence only made her lean into him a little bit more. Katsuki? His eyes seemed to refocus on her, broken from a hidden train of thought. He won't find out if we don't want him to. Earthworm is another story, though. Uraraka leaned her shoulder against his as she thought about it. You don't think he'd keep our secret? I thought you guys were friends. Bakugou scoffed. Yeah, we might be, but in his mind, Edshot will blame him just as much for not saying anything about us. We just need to make sure that we hide it from him, no matter what. Uraraka was quiet for a moment before she angled her head to fully look at him. She let her gaze trace his jaw before she settled on his red eyes. He was looking straight ahead, clearly troubled by the secrecy of it all. Aren't you worried that the case will drag on? It's going to be hard to keep something like this a secret for a long time. Bakugou tilted his head to meet her curious eyes. We just have to capture Viper before anything bad happens. I'll transfer after that. I really think it would be better if we just told Edshot. Uraraka turned her gaze forward now, unwilling to see his reaction. Could he really fault us for, well, you know, this? Bakugou sighed deeply and closed his eyes. He agreed with her, and that's what bothered him the most about all of this. Keeping a secret from his agency boss would reflect very poorly on him. Breaking a company policy wasn't wise, but he didn't want to give up Uraraka or the Viper case. He wanted both, and somehow, he couldn't find a scenario that gave him what he wanted without keeping his relationship with Uraraka a secret. Despite that, the risk was worth the reward, and he knew that Uraraka would agree. I don't think Ed's shot would be popping champagne to celebrate it. Bakugou sniffed and reached up to run a hand through his spiky hair. He's strict. All right, Uraraka squeezed his knee comfortingly. Then we'll keep this a secret, but if things get too dicey, we should revisit the topic. I can always transfer first if that happens. Bakugou bumped shoulders with her and gave her a stern look. No fucking way. You already know how I feel about that. Uraraka bumped back. You're not Deku, okay? He blinked back in surprise, completely lost on how to respond, but Uraraka continued speaking before he could ask her about it. I stayed in Mizurufu for years for him, and it came at the expense of my own success. Tokyo is amazing, and I love working at the Edshot agency, but honestly, I'd be happy working at any agency in Tokyo. I want to be with you more than I want to be the most successful heroine alive, okay? If I transfer, it's not because I'm conceding to you or doing the same thing I did with Deku. I'd be doing it because I care about us as a couple. I don't want whatever this is to be bogged down by the same things that I experienced with Deku. This is different. So, what exactly is this? He raised his eyebrows, but his voice was quiet and gravelly. Uraraka smiled at him. I was about to ask you the same thing. After all, you did bring me to your family's vacation home in Okinawa. I can only imagine why. Bakugou's eyes dropped to her mouth, and his expression turned soft. Why do you think I brought you here? I think. Uraraka tapped her chin, fully aware of Bakugou's clouded gaze on her. You missed me. Bakugou's lips twitched with a smirk. Is that right? You tell me. Uraraka shrugged teasingly, slowly batting her eyelashes at him. Maybe I was under the impression that you wanted to do some sort of training. Bakugou leaned in, crowding her space just a little. Training? What sort of training were you thinking? Oh, Uraraka let him get just a little bit closer before she turned her face away to tease him. The fun kind. The fun kind. Bakugou's voice only deepened as he moved his face in beside hers, his breath tickling her pinking cheeks. What kind of training is fun to you? Oh. His red eyes were half-lidded, but they intensely observed her sideways gaze. He watched as her breath seemed to short, breathy gasps before his nose traced up her jaw to her ear. His lips tenderly grazed the skin below it, and he released a hot breath down her neck. Uraraka was frozen in place, completely entranced by his bold advances. She couldn't find a worthy response, so she simply let her eyes fall shut and allowed herself to feel his breath on her skin. Kachchako. His voice had a slightly stern edge to it, but he exhaled again, nearly making her shudder. You haven't answered my question. Uraraka licked her lips and shoved away all thoughts of teasing him any longer. She clearly couldn't win, nor did she truly want to. You know what I mean. I think you and I have very different ideas about what is fun. He moved his body closer to her before his teeth nipped the bottom of her ear and kissed the corner of her neck, especially when it comes to training. Uraraka didn't realize that she'd rolled her head to the side until she was angling herself down on the sofa. She hummed blissfully. Why don't you show me? Bakugou followed her down onto the sofa with a teasing smirk, his legs settling between hers. That depends. An upbeat techno song broke the entire moment as Uraraka's phone rang happily on the kotatsu table. Both of them stiffened as they snapped out of it, and Bakugou pulled himself off her, trying and failing to hide his dark red cheeks. Uraraka laughed awkwardly and apologized before reaching for her phone. She didn't bother checking who the caller was in her embarrassment and swiped the answer button. Hello? Where are you? Uraraka blinked at the question from the person on the other line. Oh, what? Where are you? Mina was clearly impatient, and Uraraka could almost see her tapping her foot. Uraraka glanced at Bakugou in alarm. What do you mean? There was a pause before Mina replied. Well, you're clearly not home. I'm standing outside your door right now with wine and a bunch of snacks. When will you be home? We have to celebrate. Celebrate what? Uraraka replied, trying to divert the conversation away from herself. Mina tut-tutted her for a moment before responding. It's a surprise. So, when will you be back? I want the wine to stay chilled enough for it to taste good. Uraraka felt a rush of nervous energy as she searched for an answer. Well, you see. You're out of town, Bakugou said to her quietly, careful not to make himself heard through the phone. I'm out of town, Uraraka repeated back dumbly. You're out of town? Mina asked incredulously. Since when? Weren't you just at work this morning? Why, yeah. Uraraka swiped her hair away from covering her face, tossing Bakugou another panicked look. I had her dash. You're scouting a lead, Bakugou coached her again, clearly attempting to appear relaxed despite his flushed face. He casually pulled one of the old throw pillows over his jeans to help mask the obvious aftermath of what had transpired between them. I'm scouting a lead, Uraraka said quickly, giving him a silent look of appreciation. Sorry, Mina. Why didn't you let me know you were planning on coming over? Mina was silent for a moment before she sighed defeatedly through the phone. It's fine. It was a spur-of-the-moment idea, anyway. I had some good news that I've been wanting to share with you for a while now, and I thought you'd be home. Oh. Uraraka felt a guilty tingle travel up her spine. I'm sorry, Mina. What's up? You can tell me now if you'd like. No, Mina replied dismissively. It's okay, really. When will you be back? Uraraka bit her lip. Sometime on Sunday. Can I call you then? Mina hummed curiously. Are you with him? Who? Uraraka asked dumbly, unaware of Mina's underlying question. You know who? Mina was almost whispering now. Sexy, broody blonde? You know, the one with the superiority complex? Am I ringing any bells? Uraraka flushed in embarrassment the moment she realized that she had looked directly at Bakugou. What? Her response was very obviously manufactured, but she forced it regardless. I mean, yes, but not in the way you think, Mina. Mina wasn't convinced. Call me on Sunday, girlie. You owe me so many answers, and I'm not letting you get away this time. I've played nice long enough, so you're going to spill those beans the second I see you. Uraraka was grateful that Mina wasn't pressing the issue any further. Yeah, I can do that. Mina was beginning to hum her farewells before she stopped herself. Hey, Uraraka. Yeah. The brunette perked up at her friend's tone change, curious as to why Mina sounded so serious. Mina sighed through the phone. This time, don't let him get away, okay? I won't. Uraraka replied affirmatively, suddenly overcome with gratitude to have such a concerned friend. Despite Mina's misgivings about Bakugou from the start, she was trying to be empathetic to Uraraka's feelings and encourage her to act on them. Tell him how you feel, Mina pressed harder. For real this time, okay? Uraraka was somewhat confused by what Mina was referring to. Sure. You know I will. She hadn't divulged much about what was going on between her and Bakugou lately, but Mina sounded like she already knew. It stirred up a whirlwind of questions that Uraraka would have to ask her about later. All right, Mina's tone lightened. You know I love you, so have fun and be safe. You know what I mean by that, right? Anyway, call me on Sunday. Uraraka opened her mouth to reply, but the call ended, and she turned a confused gaze down onto her phone. As she tried to reconcile the entire confusing conversion in her head, Bakugou cleared his throat. So, are you still hungry? Mina dumped herself down on Kirishima's sofa. Are you ever going to take that thing down? Kirishima broke his attention away from the video game long enough to see that Mina was looking at the Mount Lady poster taped to the wall. What? Why would I do that? Hello. Mina gestured to herself. Girlfriend? Kirishima stiffened at the label before he remembered that he and Mina had been dating for a few weeks. So, I'm just supposed to abandon Mount Lady entirely? Uffed. Mina chucked a throw pillow at him. That would be a good start, yes. Kirishima sighed as he was killed by another player, and he set the Xbox controller down. What do you have against Mount Lady? He turned a teasing grin on her. She used to work with Bakugou and I, you know? Oh, I remember, Mina replied bitterly. That wench. No way. Kirishima wagged a finger at her. Nobody speaks ill of the lady with many dash. He cut himself off as he realized where he was going with that sentence. When he and Mina were just friends, he could get away with comments like that without a problem, but girlfriend Mina was an entirely different beast. Oh. Mina feigned curiosity. What were you about to say? She's the lady with the many, what exactly? She slid herself across the sofa, getting enticingly close to him in order to be sure that the pressure was on. Genuinely concerned guy friends, Kirishima replied carefully, who have nothing but pure thoughts and platonic intentions toward her? Emichim. Mina's teasing smile turned into a frown. Oh, cut me some slack. Kirishima shouldered her away. I'll take it down right now. No. Mina waved her hand at him as he stood up. Leave it up. You know, since you're such a concerned guy friend with pure thoughts and intentions. Kirishima jerked around to give her a tortured look. This isn't fair. I've had that poster for years. And I'm sure Mount Lady is very happy to hear that you're such a great friend. Mina's gaze flicked toward the poster where the heroine in question was leaning over suggestively. Kirishima stomped over to the wall and pulled the poster down, crumpling it in his hands. Yeah, well, I'd much rather have a poster of my actual hero crushed there instead. Oh, Bakugou would be so flattered. Mina fanned herself with a coy grin, though I'm sure he'd never admit it. Kirishima turned a frustrated shade of red at her comment. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Too much. Mina couldn't contain her smile anymore, and she laughed aloud. Kirishima shook his head at her, but a playful smile tugged on his lips. He tossed the crumpled poster over his shoulder before he dove back down on the couch to hover his face over hers. What about now? Not so much. Mina used the heel of her palm to push his face away with a manic giggle. Kirishima puffed a breath through her fingers before he rolled on top of her and laid his head on her chest. I thought you and Uraraka were supposed to hang out tonight. Mina groaned, clearly harboring many feelings on the topic. I was going to surprise her and tell her about us, but you know, Bakugou. Those two. Kirishima tilted his head so that his mouth was resting between her breasts. He puffed a hot breath through her shirt before he moved his chin to rest on top of the warm spot. They're worse than Todoroki and Momo. Don't remind me of that dark time in our class history. Mina pulled on a tuft of his hair as she shifted underneath him. I wish they'd just start hooking up again. Kirishima grunted and huffed a breath over her face. Bakugou was so much easier to deal with when he was getting laid every night. Mina laughed at his remark. Oh, I'm sure he was. Going from daily sex to no sex overnight would do a number on anyone, but something tells me that Bakugou took it pretty hard. You have no idea. Kirishima chuckled heartily before he squeezed either side of her waist. Mina jerked at the touch and admonished him for tickling her, but it only spurred him on. Stop. She cried after a minute of the torture. Stop it. I'm gonna kill you. Oh. Kirishima ran his fingers up her sides as she squirmed underneath him. I don't think you're in any position to be making threats, Missy. Stop it. Mina laughed and used her hand to smack his chin up in the air. Kirishima's teeth clacked in his mouth, but he couldn't help but laugh at her desperate attempt to throw him off. Nevertheless, he relented and both of them caught their breath, airily giggling in the aftermath. Seriously, though, Mina breathed as she fanned her face. I'm so over the love me not routine that they've been doing for the last couple of months. They need to just get their asses in gear and get on with it. This shit is driving me crazy. I couldn't agree more. Kirishima sat up and gave her an amused look, chancing one last ticklish squeeze on her knee that earned him a slap on the shoulder. But what exactly did we expect? What do you mean? Mina pushed herself up and leaned back on her hands. Well, Kirishima tilted his head back and forth thoughtfully. We both know that Bakugou might be the densest person to ever walk the face of the earth, but Uraraka? She's still pretty fresh out of her relationship with Deku. Mina frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Kirishima instinctively prepared his body to flinch away from another one of Mina's berating shoves, but it never came. Instead, he found her staring at him intensely, and he licked his lips nervously before replying. I'm just saying that might be the reason. She hasn't really said anything to you about what's going on with her and Bakugou. Please, Mina rolled her eyes. Uraraka has always been that way. Even when she was dating Deku, I never knew that anything was wrong. It was always, Deku and I are just so great and all that other bullshit. I'm sure she doesn't want to talk to anyone about Bakugou because she doesn't have any idea about it herself. Kirishima rubbed his chin in thought. I was always under the impression that you were the only one that she ever talked to about this stuff with. Mina smacked his arm again, catching the redhead by surprise. Rude.
What?
He asked dumbly, clearly unaware of his slip-up. I'm her best freaking friend, Ijiro, Mina scoffed at him. I already torment myself enough about how she doesn't talk to me about important stuff, but you're not helping right now. Sorry. Kirishima flushed with guilt. Really, I'm sorry. You better be. Mina rolled her eyes at him, but he knew that she wasn't actually upset with him. She was upset with herself. She said she's out of town with Bakugou, and heaven only knows where they are. Okinawa. Kirishima furrowed his brow curiously at her.
What?
Mina blinked back in shock. How do you know that? Kirishima flushed again. It's not important. Tell me. Mina shoved his shoulder, nearly knocking him to the floor. All right. Kirishima smirked at her. But you can't be mad about it, okay? Spill. Mina pointed a finger at him and gave him a pointed look. Kirishima exhaled a chuckle and leaned into her a little bit more. Bakugou mentioned it to me in passing. I asked if he wanted to hang out this weekend, and he was like, fuck no, I'm going to Okinawa with Uraraka, and then I ended up helping him plan a few things. Mina gaped at him. So Bakugou actually confides in you? Oh, don't look so damn surprised. Kirishima rolled his eyes at her teasingly. That guy doesn't have a romantic bone in his body. I'm the only one he can trust with this shit. Mina leaned forward and rested her chin in her palms. Well, don't hold back, Ijiro. Being your girlfriend means that I get to be privy to your friendship with Bakugou. So get to the good stuff. What does he have planned for my sweet little Uraraka? Kirishima gave her a side smirk. You're so damn lucky to have me, you know that? Shut up and tell me. Kirishima waved his hands in front of his face. All right, fine. I'll tell you, but you can't say shit about it to Uraraka, okay? Obviously. Mina rolled her eyes and shook her head. The dating rules clearly state that you're just as privy to mine and Uraraka's friendship, but they never intersect. Kirishima couldn't help but smile. Dating Mina was endlessly funny and enjoyable. When they were friends, they tried to restrict their gossip about their other friends to each other. However, crossing the threshold into a romantic relationship had placed a foundation of trust that allowed them to speak freely with one another. They kept each other's secrets, and it allowed them to meddle in the romantic lives of Bakugou and Uraraka cohesively. They were no longer working against each other, and it only made it more fun for them both. Uraraka and Bakugou were just the fortunate first victims of it. All right. Kirishima pulled her in and cupped a hand around her ear before whispering all the plans he'd suggested to Bakugou. He wasn't sure which ones the blonde had actually taken into serious consideration, but he had a gut feeling about it. Bakugou and Uraraka would come back from Okinawa as different people. A power couple to rival himself and Mina. So that's it for today. If you liked the video, leave a like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell. And if you want to contribute to the entire story being illustrated, just read the information in the description below.